Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Jeff Rosen, to the National Constitution Center, to the Atlantic for having this wonderful event. Thank you to Senator Coons for opening for me. It was a great honor. So consistent with our political discourse today, I'd actually like to begin my remarks in the gutter, as it were, by way of a short anecdote. In the 18th century, London had a crap problem, literally. Mass quantities of human waste, industrial contaminants were pouring into the Thames. It actually smelled so bad that Parliament was unable to hold hearings on many occasions. But the inconvenience was actually the least of the problems. Periodic cholera outbreaks had by the 1850s claimed tens of thousands of lives in London alone. So crap, which for millennia had really just been a human inconvenience, had become a social problem. And social problems require collective and social solutions. And that's what London pursued. In the end, what they did was to build a fully integrated sewer system. And it worked. It worked perfectly. And by the 1870s, governmental authorities across the industrializing nations were starting to come to the same realization that London had. So in response to this growing crap problem, they gave a more specific meaning to an older word. They started calling the various types of industrial waste pollution, the word that we use today. Today, what I want to talk about is a new kind of pollution problem, the problem of digital pollution, a concept that I've been developing in collaboration with innovator, technologist, and executive Judy Estrin to describe the kind of collective anxiety many of us are expressing these days about the negative consequences of digitization. And Judy and I actually believe that our ability to manage or not this phenomenon of digital pollution will be among the defining issues of our age, and it may well determine the future course not only of our democracy, but potentially liberal democracies in general. So today what I want to talk about is sort of what digital pollution is, some of the attributes that make it unique, and a few thoughts on how organizing around this concept might actually help us to manage and address the deleterious effects of digital technology on our lives without relinquishing the benefits, of which there are many. So at this stage, it should be clear to us that digital technology has some substantial downsides, from privacy violations to harassment and abuse, to the instigation in some cases of actual physical violence through misinformation and manipulation. But I actually think it's our host, Jeff Rosen, who put the democratic implications best in his recent article, which has been handed out to all of you from the Atlantic. And since he's elevated so many voices tonight, I think it's only fair to elevate his. So he writes, Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms have accelerated public discourse to warp speed, creating virtual versions of the mob. Inflammatory posts based on passion travel farther and faster than arguments based on reason. Rather than encouraging deliberation, mass media undermine it by creating bubbles and echo chambers in which citizens see only those opinions they already embrace. We are living, in short, in a Madisonian nightmare. Some recent polling that we've actually conducted at Knight Foundation in collaboration with the Gallup organization suggests that many Americans actually agree with this sentiment. So in a survey actually of 20,000 across the country, 58% say it's harder today to be informed rather than easier due to the plethora of information and new sources of information available. 73% of Americans say the spread of inaccurate information on the internet is a major problem with news coverage today. And in a survey of over 3,000 college students, these are digital natives, we found that 83% say it's too easy to say things anonymously on social media. 59% say social media stifles free expression due to reprisal and harassment. And 82% say that social media is responsible for a rise in hate speech. And all of these numbers are trending in the wrong directions. So how do we get out of this Madisonian nightmare? Well, Judy and I actually think that there are some parallels between industrial and digital pollution that can help us make sense of the tension between the good and the bad of our digital lives and perhaps provide a path to strengthening our democracy. First, like industrial pollution, much of the bad of digital pollution is coexistent with the good. So more convenient and tailored services, that requires digital surveillance. When it comes to echo chambers and mob mentalities, in many ways, Me Too and Black Lives Matter use the same tools as white nationalists and Holocaust deniers. Both use online community to affirm and to validate individuals. And both use the megaphone of social media to spawn sustainable movements. When it comes to expression, greater access to information and expression than at any other time in history also means more negative expression and a more challenging information environment, at least so far. Second, pollution is at its most toxic in its aggregate effect. This is most clear in the case of climate change. The ethical implications of carbon emissions escalate when the fate of the whole climate is at stake. Similarly, while an individual act of hate speech or trolling has negative ethical ramifications, The real crisis is the mass intensification and the sum total of this expression and its potential effect on the character, the actual character of our democracy. Third, digital pollution, like industrial pollution, is an example of what economists would call an externality. An externality is a cost or a benefit that affects someone who doesn't choose it. So when our taxpayer dollars go to clean up a toxic waste spill, we're basically paying the price for an industrial cost that some producer chose to incur. And this is an acute issue with digital pollution, and it comes into vivid relief when major technology companies make the relatively brazen statement that, quote, "we're just platforms," which they say a lot. And literally what they mean is this: we, the companies, are a mere site for activity. The activity belongs to our, quote, users. Well, your users, who are also people and citizens, are able to pollute at scale, to spread misinformation, to troll, to harass, etc., because your platform exists. Yet by calling themselves just platforms, these companies often voice the democratic costs of their services onto us, the democratic costs onto us as a society. Fourth, digital and industrial pollution have an optimal point of occurrence. We tend to think of pollution as something that needs to be eradicated. It's not. By almost every measure, our ability to tolerate some pollution has actually dramatically improved society. Population, wealth, infant mortality, lifespan, morbidity, all of these indicators have dramatically tended in the right direction since the Industrial Revolution, since we could pollute at some scale and produce goods. So pollution is really the byproduct of systems intended to produce a collective benefit. And that's why the study of industrial pollution itself is not a judgment on whether the actions are good or bad. Rather, it's a mechanism for understanding so that we, all of us collectively, have a say in how much pollution to allow and what to do about its toxic effects. And that's really the key issue in this analogy that I'll return to in a moment. But before I do that, I'd just like to explain briefly sort of why we need a new management mechanism and why our existing rules and norms around online activity may not directly apply. So direct-to-consumer retail, advertising, the provision of news, finding a place to stay, all the things you do online, they're not new services, and they're not even really new as data services. So what's different about the internet? And I really think there are sort of three things that are key, and I'll just provide brief detail on each here. The first is scope. The reality is that today our digital experiences now touch most aspects of human experience and do so often in very intimate ways. We live our work and our social lives practically through our screens. We meet our friends, our lovers, our future spouses through these screens. Second is the issue of scale. The internet creates instant connectivity and is highly participatory, both of these things. And so as a result, the flow of information and interaction may really exceed safe human management. And a critical driver of this scale is the low cost of entry. Anyone can now rent their apartment, sell their junk, post an article or idea, or just amplify sentiment simply by hitting like. Much of what we do online feels free, has almost no input costs. And the third challenge is that of complexity, in particular the increasing complexity of algorithmic and artificial intelligence systems. These large-scale systems cannot be audited in clear ways to identify sources of error. When they go wrong, we can't see them from a kind of God's eye point of view that will tell us what happened. So this combination of scope, of scale, and of complexity has sort of led to changes that are more profound in many ways than the transition from agricultural to industrial society over a much shorter period of time. And we are incredibly ill-equipped to manage this transition, including the people who have created this technology, and that's really where the problem lies. Right now, the major internet companies treat many of the profound social choices implicated in their platforms as their decisions to make. This is a critical distinction. You only need to look in a passing way at the controversies of the past year. InfoWars, misinformation on Facebook, privacy breaches, these are treated as individual company decisions. And as a result of this, we end up going along with the commercial pressures that these companies face toward a kind of technological determinism, that the technology simply must march forward toward less friction, greater ubiquity, and more convenience. It is treated as inevitable that there must be billions of posts, billions of pictures, billions of videos. And when these same corporate leaders talk to institutional investors in quarterly earnings calls, typically what they focus on is more users, more engagement, greater activity. That's what's rewarded in the stock price. But the problem, of course, is that these are not just commercial questions. They are fundamental questions about societal values, and they do not belong to the companies alone. They belong to all of us. So where do we go from here? What do we do about that? Well, Judy and I in our work really believe that the critical choice right now is this. Will we treat the effects of digital technology and digital experience as something to be managed collectively or not? And when we argue for this, we're not arguing in lieu of a solution. We're arguing that coming to this recognition is a critical part of the solution, because there is no consensus today that the way that there is with industrial pollution, that digital pollution is in fact a problem that obligates collective management. We believe we must now stake the same collective claim in digital pollution. What we face is not the good or bad decision of any one individual or even any one company. We should collectively decide at what level we can tolerate the problems associated with digital pollution in exchange for the benefits. And we should be able to decide collectively what we're willing to give up in terms of economic growth or convenience to prevent social harm. We have a model for how to do this. Industrial pollution is studied in an objective way. Atmospheric and environmental scientists research how industrial byproducts change the air and the water. Ecologists measure the impact of industrial processes on plant and animal species. Environmental economists create models that help us understand the trade-offs between, for example, a rule limiting vehicle emissions and long-term economic growth. We require a similar understanding of digital phenomena, their breadth, their impact, and the mechanisms that influence them. And then we need to decide what we want to keep and what we'll give up. Perhaps the internet will be less free, less instantaneous, less convenient, or God forbid, a little less entertaining than it is today. We may begin to add friction to some transactions, and we might take steps to enable and even enforce constructive, fact-based debate instead of rewarding radicalism, extremism, and polarization. It's certainly not clear how to manage digital pollution in a way that preserves all the benefits that a ubiquitous, on-demand internet has provided to society. But no matter the future, our view is that the course must be set by the whole of society, armed with objective information to decide what we sacrifice. We're absolutely in this together. Thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it.